All right, everybody, welcome into the Alley-Oop. I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much for tuning into this Thursday edition. Joined by my Pacific Division correspondents today, we're doing the Pacific Division season preview. If you missed yesterday's episode, awesome episode with the Central Division correspondents. Had a fantastic time. Make sure to go rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on all your podcast apps or on the YouTube channel. I'm trying to make this accessible for both audiences going forward. So if you're interested in one platform or the other, would really appreciate the support on those fronts. But on this episode, we've got a fantastic list of correspondents here. With the Golden State Warriors, we have CJ Holmes, who covers for the San Francisco Chronicle. With the Los Angeles Clippers, we have Robert Flom, who does 213 Hoops for the Clippers. For the Lakers, we've got Anthony Irwin covering Lakers Lounge. For the Phoenix Suns, we've got Brenden Duenas, who's better known as AZ Sports Zone on Twitter. He does Bright Side of the Sun and Locked on Suns. And then for the Sacramento Kings, Brenden Nunes, who does Sactown 1140 and the King's Pulse podcast. Thank you so much for all of the love and support over the course of these last few days. It has been tremendous. Keep listening, keep liking, keep rating and reviewing. If this is going to keep growing and doing some crazy things. So I am so excited. Without further ado, here's the alley-oop.
Giannis trailing the lob. Boom. Run, 2-on-1. Green the finish. Wow, the alley-oop. LeBron turned the corner. Inside! He made Yusuf Nurkic a screensaver. Here comes Murray. Alley-oop to Gordon. Oh, what a play!
All right, joining me now is CJ Holmes, who's covering the Golden State Warriors for the San Francisco Chronicle. CJ, thank you so much for hopping on, man. I really appreciate your coverage and excited to hear about the Warriors this season from you.
Hey, thanks for having me. My pleasure.
All good. Let's dive right into it then. Obviously, the Warriors coming off of a title back in 2022, regress a little bit back in 2023. What do you think is the most interesting thing about this team right now heading into this next season?
Man, it's got to be the Chris Paul dynamic. Back on draft day, they swapped Jordan Poole and a couple of young players for Chris Paul with hopes of, shoring up that point guard play behind Stephen Curry. Last year the Warriors' second unit was arguably their biggest issue. They had the best starting five in the league by most advanced metrics.
Right.
But it's those non-Curry minutes that really got this team in trouble, especially on the road. So you bring in a guy like Chris Paul, whether he of course he's going to start tonight against the Lakers with Draymond Green injured or Draymond's back. That's going to be a whole nother story. But
yeah,
Paul is going to play minutes with that second unit, no matter whether he starts or not, right? And the goal is if you bring him in there, get some sure, point guard play, someone who can get guys like Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, Dario Saric easy shots. And hopefully when Curry comes off the floor, they'll be able to sustain some leads. When Curry and Paul are playing together, it's also going to be very interesting. We'll get a good look at that, what that's going to look like tonight when Curry, Chris Paul, Klay Thompson are on the court at the same time. The marriage between those two Hall of Fame point guards is undoubtedly the most interesting thing to watch as the Golden State Warriors season gets going.
It's such a fascinating dynamic seeing those guys go back and forth for so many years and now being on the same team. You've seen the jokes. Everybody's seen the jokes that everybody's talking about. Chris Paul in a Golden State Warriors uniform just feels like a wild thing. There's been a lot of talk about him maybe starting. There's been a lot of talk about this starting unit that you mentioned at the beginning, how dynamic it was last year at the best advanced metrics of any starting lineup in the league. And yet the team seems to be thinking about, hey, are we going to start Chris Paul instead of Kevon Looney? Is maybe Draymond Green going to go to the bench? I'm so curious as to how that dynamic plays out throughout this year. Do you have an impression, like just what you've seen so far of how that's going to play out?
Well, Chris is definitely going to start, at least the first three preseason games with Draymond Green injured. Like I said before, when Draymond comes out, Coach Steve Kerr will have to go back to the drawing board. When Chris first got traded to Golden State, in my mind, I was thinking he needs to be a reserve 100%. This is a guy who has played in less and less games over the past three seasons. Of course, the big thing about him is he seems to never be healthy come playoff time. And the idea of him coming off the bench just makes sense in order to conserve him as a player and give that second unit a boost. But, the more he's been here, the more we've gotten to talk to him this week, I'm starting to realize that it really doesn't matter if he starts or not. Head coach Steve Kerr, he's going to be on the court.
Yeah.
Right? He's going to be on the court no matter what. And head coach Steve Kerr hasn't been afraid to tinker with his starting lineups depending on the matchup. So I think that Chris is going to start a handful of games. I think he's going to come off the bench a handful of games. And I think it's going to be determined on a game-to-game basis which lineups work best for the Warriors, given their opponent.
All of it's in prep for a playoff run. This team obviously has massive playoff expectations year in and year out, given that you have Steph Curry in the building. Right. I'm curious, though, beyond those top six, which seem pretty solidified, there's still a lot of questions about who steps into those roles. I think the assumption, of course, is that a larger role for Jonathan Kuminga, for Moses Moody, those young guys hoping to provide a little bit extra, maybe exceed expectations. How have they looked so far, and what's the general impression of those guys as they enter year 3?
Well, like you said, Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody, both of them are expected to make some sort of leap entering their third year in the NBA. But I'll tell you, man, Jonathan Kuminga, he's a lot of positive things about him and his development coming out of camp. This is a guy who seemingly had a strong summer. Every time he popped up on social media, he seemed to be in the gym, had a 60-point game at the crossover event in Seattle. And even Chris Paul, he just got here and he's saying that kid can really go, that kid can play. It all seems like it's building up to what's finally going to be a breakout season for Jonathan Kuminga. People thought that last season was going to be that season for him. However, for one reason or another, he just couldn't stick in the rotation, play consistent minutes. There was like times last year, when Andrew Wiggins was out of the rotation dealing with his family matter, that Kuminga saw an increase in minutes and he performed well. But come playoff time, he found himself out of the rotation again. This is a big year for Jonathan, and I think that if he takes that next step and starts to fully realize his potential and put it together, it's only going to make the Warriors that much more dangerous. The kid is arguably the most athletic player in the league. He has all the tools. He has an all-star level skill set. But the key to unlocking that is putting it all together, and this is going to be a big season for him.
Going to be fascinating. We've seen the dynamic between the young guys and the older core sort of play out in Golden State over these last couple of years, and obviously this last year it shifted back towards the old core. Does this group have another run in them? Does this group have that extra gear now as Steph gets up in age? Clay, I think he's got a lot of miles on him now coming off of the 2 major injuries. He's bounced back a little bit, but the playoffs were unkind. Draymond has signed the new contract. How much more does he have to give as one of the best defensive players that we've ever seen? Just so curious as to whether this group can really tie that together once more.
Well, after the Warriors lost to the Lakers in the second round of the playoffs last year, the consistent message from Steph, Dre, and Clay was, we have more left in the tank. I think what Curry says specifically is we want to ride this thing till the wheels fall off. And I think all three know that they have more to give. Stephen Curry dealt with his injuries last year, but, he was still at the height of his powers. Draymond Green was second team all defense. And Klay Thompson, despite the not playing in the second half of back-to-backs and the cautious approach to his usage, he led the league in 3-point makes.
Right.
I think that if, the front office thought that those three didn't have more left in the tank, then they wouldn't have signed Draymond to a 4-year deal this offseason. And, I think the idea is Mike Dunleavy said that they want to bring Klay Thompson back too. At the end of the day, when all three of those guys are healthy, the Warriors are extremely difficult to beat. And I don't see that changing this season or even within the next couple seasons.
Right. Last year, this team won 44 games, finished as a 6th seed in the West. I currently have them at 47. I think that the addition of Chris Paul and just some added progression for Kuminga and Moody and guys like that, I think it will help them. I don't see them as, especially in the regular season, as one of those top line teams. It seems like they're going to rest at least a little bit, and they're going to do some experimenting, as you mentioned, with the lineups and trying to get guys as ready for playoff matchups as possible. Where do you see them kind of in season win projections, and where they kind of finish in the West this year?
Well, hey, Ryan, if you're predicting around 47 wins, I mean, that puts them at the top of the West if you base it on last year's standings.
Fair. Completely fair.
I do think I do think the integration of Paul is going to take some time, may lead to some early hiccups as Steve Kerr tries to, feel out his rotation. Kerr has, he usually takes his time with that kind of stuff, and he's usually still tinkering with lineups even deep into the regular season. I do think the Warriors win total will improve based on last year.
Yeah.
And that's simply because I don't think they're going to be as bad as they were on the road last year. If the Warriors win half of their road games a year ago, they're a top 3 seed easily.
Yeah.
They're arguably the best team in the league at Chase Center. So I do think the addition of Paul is going to help shore up some of those second unit issues. I do not think they're going to be as disconnected and disjointed as on the road. The big words coming out of camp this first week has been, chemistry, connectivity, togetherness, stuff like that. So I do think that it helps that they're entering this season with a lot less distractions than they were last season. If I had to predict the win total, I think what they won last year, 43 games.
Yeah, 44.
44.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 47 to 50 might, be on track.
Yeah.
I think they're an improved team compared to the team they were last year. Less distractions. Jonathan Kuminga is expected to take the lead, put those factors together, and the Warriors are going to be one of those teams atop the West.
Going to be fascinating to watch them. I know missing Jordan Poole wasn't fantastic last year, probably a drain on a lot of the minutes, but a guy like Dante DiVincenzo, missing him, he's going to be a tough one to replace. But hey, Chris Paul comes in, Corey Joseph maybe spot minutes here or there, Dario Saric, he should be an interesting backup big man. Looking forward to seeing what this team can provide. What do you think it would take if there's one thing you could boil it down to that would help this team get through the Western Conference in the playoffs this year?
Defense and team rebounding. The Warriors weren't the defensive team that you're accustomed to seeing last season. Some people think that has a lot to do with the departure of Mike Brown to Sacramento. Defense is all about chemistry and communication, and that's something that the Warriors struggled with last year. Granted, it seems like they're going to this season with better vibes, and that should translate to better production at the defensive end. And they remain one of the smaller teams in the league. That seems to always be the thing with the Warriors every year. Oh, they're too small. But, in those championship seasons that they had, that didn't stop them because they had that willingness to crash the glass from a team rebounding perspective.
Right.
So the offense is going to come. Steph Curry's still on this team. Klay Thompson's still on this team. Chris Paul's going to be out there dishing. Offense is going to be an issue. It's going to make a difference for the Warriors this season is their ability to guard and their ability to crash the glass at both ends.
We will see what happens with this team. But hey, CJ, thank you so much for stopping by. Really appreciate your coverage of the Warriors, and I can't wait to talk to you throughout the year, man.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Ryan.
All right, joining me now is Robert Flom, managing editor of 213 Hoops. Robert, thank you so much for hopping on with me this season, man. Really excited to talk Clippers with you.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you having me on. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talk Clippers.
Should be interesting. I think there are some interesting things and definitely some layers now as we're nearing the start of the season, and this team may or may not make a big trade that kind of affects the psyche of what this team is going to look like. But for posterity's sake, we are recording this on October 5th. If they make a trade and they decide, we're gonna throw in a James Harden deal, we may re-record, we may not. But for now, we're gonna go 50-50. That's what Robert told me before the podcast. Is like, hey, it might happen, it might not. What do you think is the most interesting thing about this team right now, Robert?
If you're not talking about the James Harden deal, I don't want to say Bones Highland. I would say that they are leaning into in camp playing faster. It's something I think it's kind of a common saying that a lot of teams talk about in camp. I think very rarely do you hear teams want to play slower and talk about in camp, oh, we really want to slow down. Usually it's they want to play faster. But I do think that, the Clippers notoriously added Russell Westbrook in the buyout market towards the end of last season. Russell Westbrook, notoriously, a guy who likes to run, not a guy who plays very slow, not a guy who excels in the half court. So I think with training camp, with a full season, a full off season with him, and I think he's really entrenched as their third guy. I mean, we can talk about whether that's a good idea or not, but I think if they're going to be relying heavily on Russell Westbrook, I think the idea to play fast is better. And what makes it interesting is that Kawhi Leonard, not a guy who likes to play fast, a guy who's very methodical and slow. How will that work? Are they going to get Kawhi to play faster? Are they going to try to stagger him and Russ as much as possible to have kind of two different play styles? I don't know, but that is interesting to me because it seems kind of legitimate and also seems a little contrary to what the best player on the team likes to do.
Yeah, it seems like they're diametrically opposed, if I'm being honest with you. Like that seems like a problem when your best player doesn't want to play that style. And we've heard a lot about, hey, Paul George is Russell Westbrook's guy. Like there are some maybe different factors there in terms of who is answering to who, the styles of play, the ways that these guys want to go about it and win this season. But I do think that this team is interesting and unique, maybe not from the key additions and key losses kind of perspective, because it's mostly a run it back kind of season for the Clippers, KJ Martin being the main addition, key loss being Eric Gordon. But it really is mostly a run it back outside of maybe you could say Russell Westbrook as a buyout addition, really changing the style of the team. How much did that affect things last year? And do you think that's a good or bad thing going forward?
It's funny you mention that because a lot of fans, I think, are not happy that the Clippers re-signed a lot of their free agents and did not make many moves in the offseason. I would say the majority are not very happy with the offseason because of the run it back. The Clippers, were a huge disappointment last year. They, lost in the first round. They barely made the playoffs. I think they were 1 win, maybe 2 wins ahead of the play-in tournament. They played the Suns. They lost in 5 games. And yes, Paul George didn't play. Kawhi Leonard, was lost to injury in game 2. But still, hugely disappointing season. Last offseason, the talks were high. They wanted a championship. They were ready. They had their team. They had their depth, etc. Disaster. So running that team back seemed really bad. The counter argument, which has been brought up by some media people who have the ear of the organization and just by people who are a little bit more believers maybe in Russell Westbrook, is that the team did kind of blow it up at the trade deadline. They added Russell Westbrook, they traded for Bones Highland, they traded for Mason Plumlee, they traded for Eric Gordon, who's now gone. But they sent out guys who were parts of their rotation, Luke Kennard, Reggie Jackson, John Wall, Eric Gordon, of course, they let walk over the summer. So you could argue that their team has already been shaken up. I would not necessarily agree with that. I think it is really a lot of the same team as started last season, and I don't think that's a good thing. In terms of why, I think they really do have faith in Russell Westbrook, as well as, it sounds funny, but Mason Plumlee, they went into last season not having a backup center. It was a really, really, really poor decision. And Mason Plumlee, not an all-star, but a very competent backup center who helped them a lot after the trade deadline. And I think, even if he's not a guy who will swing playoff series, is a guy who I think they're confident will help raise the regular ceiling floor of the team. I think that's why, but I also think, as we've alluded to, they are still looking to shake things up with a Harden deal. So it's a fine line, the deal, when they're like, oh, we're happy with our team, we like our team, we're running it back, but at the same time, we're preparing to trade massive assets for a star player. So, take with a grain of salt.
I think it's fair on both sides to at least have the belief that one side is more correct than the other here, where Russell Westbrook did have some at least uniquely interesting playoff games for this team in that Phoenix Suns series, and some of them were very impactful, some of them were not so great. And then you could potentially add in a James Harden trade on top of that, and maybe that's all the change you really need if you believe in Ivica Zubac, if you believe in Mason Plumlee, if you believe in the versions of the team where, hey, you just need the right perimeter mix around those centers, and maybe you've got a small ball option here or there, and you're starting to cook with gas once you get to the playoffs. How would you think a James Harden trade, does that affect the ceiling of this team in a drastic way? Where do you think the ceiling is now, kind of with or without that trade?
Right now, I would say the ceiling is a Western Conference Finals run. It's very hard for me to see this team as currently constructed winning a championship. The caveat is, Kawhi Leonard, when he's healthy, and he seems healthy, down the stretch of last season was unbelievable. The first 2 games of the playoffs was unbelievable. When you have a guy of that talent, like, you can win. You can win it all. You can. But the Clippers are old. They are injury prone. A lot of their depth has aged out as well. I think a lot of their players are one-way guys. They do not really have a ton of two-way players who I think are really good bets to be solid rotation guys. So I don't love this team as like a championship contender. I think the team itself probably doesn't view itself that way. I think certainly they could win a couple playoff rounds if they're able to dodge teams that are particularly bad matchups, like the Denver Nuggets. I think they could make a deep run. Like, they actually match up really well with the Suns. Even though the Suns have more talent, I think the Clippers could absolutely beat them in a head-to-head series. They've always matched up well with the LeBron Lakers because they have so many guys to throw at LeBron. But yeah, I mean, the Nuggets, I cannot see this Clippers team beating the Nuggets. And honestly, there are other teams. Like, I don't know how this team matches up with like a healthy Grizzlies team who are just so much faster and more athletic. Luka has always given them nightmares, even though they've beaten him twice in the playoffs. So, I would say the Western Conference Finals is reasonable. In terms of a Harden, I mean, I think it raises the floor and the ceiling. For all of his playoff woes, he's a guy who we've seen also single-handedly win big playoff games. And the Clippers right now really only have 2 of those guys. I mean, you could argue maybe Russell Westbrook, like Norm Powell had a 40-point game against the Suns, but I mean, in an ideal world, Norm Powell is playing, 20 minutes a game in the playoffs. He's not like a guy you're leaning on for that kind of impact. So I think Harden, for all of his flaws, would raise the team's ceiling. Would it still be like a championship team? I think it would increase the chances enough that I'd be more comfortable saying it. Would it help against like the Nuggets? I don't really think so. But like, again, if you have so much firepower, if you just hit a lot of threes for a series, hey, maybe that's enough. So I'm still in on a Harden deal, depending, of course, on what the package is. I think from all that we've heard, it's mostly expiring contracts and picks for this year. That would not hurt the team much. It would help the team on the court. You could argue that in 5 years, the Clippers might really, really rue a Harden deal. It might be really bad if they don't win a championship or make a finals. But I think for right now, I think it's good that the Clippers are still pursuing Harden because they should be trying to win a championship, and I don't think this team is truly a championship contender.
Yeah, it's a lot of layers there. It does feel like this team, if you added a third guy that you can really trust to make high-level decisions in the playoffs, and he's had some moments where he put up 40 against the Celtics multiple times. Like, this kind of guy is an impact player as long as he's in the right situation and as long as he doesn't have all of the pressure on him to create. And in LA, you would be just fine in that regard. At times you could throw the ball to Kawhi. At times you could throw the ball to PG. Or you can run some sets where, yeah, Harden is the initial distributor, but the actual goal of the sets is to spray the ball around, and he would automatically walk in as the best passer on the team. So there is some layers to that for sure. Despite all that, I still think that this team, it would surprise me if they won 50 games during the regular season, just because they are, like, one, it's the injury-prone factor, but the other is that there are just some layers to their defense and their offense where it can get stagnant, it can get a little bit clunky at times, that the things just don't always line up. And if you're in and out of the lineup, if you're a guy like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, then it's just really difficult to consistently win against the best teams in the NBA that way. So they're going to drop some of those games, and maybe even they'll drop some of the games to the average or subpar teams that you wouldn't have normally expected from them. So I currently have them at 45 games won, at 45 wins. And They won 44 last year. I don't think it's that crazy to believe that it would be 45. If they got Harden, maybe bump it up a couple, 2 or 3 here or there, but it's just hard for me to see much more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally fair. I think in my Pacific Division preview, I think I said 46 or 47. I honestly can't remember. I think somewhere in the I think going upper 40s, if you're really optimistic about their health or some of their young guys, I think you could say like upper 40s. I completely agree. 50 seems very hard for me to see. It would be, Paul George has said he's going to play every game this year. If healthy, we will see.
That sounds like a horrible idea, by the way. Like, I mean,
it does.
There are some layers to this. Like, it is okay to sit out a couple of games here or there. Like, even the Nuggets did it this last year, and they still won a championship. It's just, when you do play, you have to be better.
Yes. I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think to some extent, I wonder if like some of the load management and injury concerns and the buzz has almost gotten to the Clippers' heads a little bit. I think for the most part, they've had a totally smart approach, which is like, Kawhi Leonard is the best player on the team. He has, we know he has lower body issues. Like his knee is messed up. We know that the Clippers need to keep him healthy. And Paul George, like, has not had those same kinds of issues, but he's been injured a lot. And he's also, I mean, he's entering his mid-30s. He was in the 2010 draft. He's been on many deep playoff runs. He's played a huge amount of minutes. Like, this is a guy who you do not want playing 82 games, 34 minutes a game at this stage of his career because his body is going to break down. So, I think I agree with you. I don't think that's a good approach. And I think the key for the Clippers is, like, can you get to the playoffs healthy and in, like, an okay position? I think, 45, 46 wins, that's probably enough to get you out of the play-in, even in, I think, a pretty loaded Western Conference. That should be enough for, like, the 6th seed or 5th seed. Staying out of the play-in, I think, is just the top priority. As long as you're set for the playoffs, I think that's fine. Obviously, home court would be nice, but again, being very honest, the Clippers' home court isn't the best home court that's ever happened either, so maybe doesn't mean as much as it means to other teams. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think 45 is a very, very reasonable wins. If they got Harden, I might be a little bit more generous. If they got him, like, now, depending on who they set out, I might get it up to, like, 49, but, like, yeah, I mean, 50 is just, it's very hard to see with how old this team is.
If they did get Harden, I would seriously consider 50. But as you mentioned, there are, I think, 11 teams in the Western Conference or so that you think could really challenge for above 500 and want to be in the playoffs and really have high aspirations for themselves. And not everybody's going to be able to do that. So it'll be interesting to see. Right now, I have this team as a first-round exit. If they did get Harden, I would probably bump that up to a second round. I don't think that they're in that top tier in terms of the total playoff contenders and Western Conference contenders, but could I see this team defeating the Lakers in the conference semifinals? Absolutely. Could I see this team defeating the Phoenix Suns or the Memphis Grizzlies or the Golden State Warriors? Absolutely. It's all going to come down to health, and it's just hard to bet on the Clippers with that.
I mean, I think it's impossible to bet on the Clippers, really. And I think you've seen in the media this year, a lot of big-name media people are out on the Clippers this year. It's year 5 with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. They've made one conference finals run. That was already 2+ years ago now. And I think you're seeing a lot of people have a lot of skepticism regarding them. So they could, I think, again, for them, like with any team, it's really matchup dependent. Nuggets, horrible matchup. Lakers, I think, pretty good one. Suns, pretty good. Again, I think the Suns are a more talented team. But, like, if they got the Lakers in the first round and then got, like, the Suns in the second round, like, hey, they could beat those teams. But yeah, I mean, I also think that they're not going to be done regardless, unless they really, really empty out the chips for Harden. I think that they would probably still make further moves. They really need an upgrade at power forward. I would be very surprised if they did not have interest in Jeremy Grant. We would see maybe other power forwards, but yeah, I mean, they're just not a championship team right now. Harden would get them a lot closer, but I think it's very fair to be skeptical of them compared to both the top teams in the West and just how deep the West is. Like, can they even stay out of the play-in? Who knows?
Like the idea of Jeremy Grant on that team. That would be very interesting. I could absolutely see that. But hello, I mean, it has been a great time talking to you, Robert. Thank you so much for hopping on with me. And I can't wait to hear the rest of your thoughts on the Clippers throughout this season. Should be a lot of fun. All right, joining me now is Anthony Irwin, who is the host of Lakers Lounge, one of the iconic Lakers follows on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Anthony, thank you so much for taking your time to talk Lakers with me this season.
With that kind of praise, man, I'll be here tomorrow. I'll talk.
I love it. No, I mean it is true when you are, because I'm 26, so when you grow up in this business, there are certain people that you latch onto, and you and Harrison were the two that I latched onto from a young age, just about covering the Lakers and then what that actually looked like, and you guys definitely do it right.
I appreciate that, man. I was talking with Sabrina last night, recording after the Lakers preseason game. And while I was watching the preseason game, Jen found one of those memories on Facebook and pointed out that I've been doing this for 11 years. And it's just like you mentioning that, like, you've been following the stuff and you're 26 years old and all of that. And D'Angelo Russell has kids and he's in his 9th year. I have felt ancient for basically 24 hours now. Yeah,
I could imagine, but no, it's a good thing, man. You've been doing great work for a long time, and I'm really excited to talk with you. I'm really excited to talk about the Lakers, who they got so close to the end of the road last year, and ultimately finished in the conference finals before losing there. But the team has sort of remade itself over the course of the last calendar year after getting rid of Russell Westbrook and bringing in new additions, the growth of Austin Reeves. Tell me, what do you think is the most interesting thing about the team right now?
You know, it's interesting. I was watching last night and they played, it's the preseason and not everybody's trying particularly hard, but it is a Nets team that has like some legit good defenders, right? Ben Simmons is elite when he wants to be. Mikal Bridges is really good on the wing as well. Nick Claxton thinks that he should have been a Defensive Player of the Year candidate last year.
Apparently so.
They have the tools and they have so much length. And it's just like, you look at them on the court and you're like, it's all arms, it's all hands, and they're all athletic. And yet the Lakers lit them up for 75 points in the first half, again, it's preseason single game sample size. The Lakers shot the ball really well. But you look at this roster and you look at the various lineups that Darvin Ham can go to, and almost any combination has at least 2, sometimes 3, or even 4 shooters on the court, depending on who all is out there. And I was marveling at, holy crap, this is a modern team. The Lakers have taken forever to like join the modern 3-point revolution, and here they are. And yet, two things really kind of struck me over the course of the game. 1, wow, there's a lot of firepower. 2, wow, there are not a lot of defenders on this team. So they're going to be in some shootouts. They're really going to. It's going to be an entertaining brand of basketball. But to me, what I find the most interesting is a team that won their championship a couple years ago through defensive fortitude, through physicality, through all of those things, has now completely shifted into running and gunning and firing from deep and trying to outscore opponents. So will the Lakers score enough to keep up with the insane offenses at the very top of the league? And will they get stops when they absolutely need to, as every team needs to in big key moments?
I think the offense is going to kill. I think that what Austin Reeves showed last year, what Rui Hachimura showed last year, just adding those guys, kind of unexpected contributors to what LeBron and AD brought, and then D'Angelo Russell, I assume, was thought to be the third guy, at least for most of the time after the trade, and then it turns out, no, Austin Reeves has got it. Austin Reeves has provided some of that, and then, like you mentioned, Gabe Vincent, Taurean Prince, Christian Wood, maybe Max Christie develops into a wing shooter off the bench. There's a lot of reason, I think, to have faith in this team. My biggest question is whether you think, or not biggest, but like one of them is, how real were the playoff runs for Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura? Just, is that the trajectory that those guys are just going on now, or did they catch fire in a bottle?
Well, considering Rui shot almost 50% from 3-point range, I don't think that's real. I don't think he like somehow overnight became one of the greatest shooters in the history of the sport. Reeves, though, I have believed in his shooting. You look at his stroke, and it just kind of makes sense that it would go in. And over the course of last season, leading up to them finally mercifully trading Russell Westbrook, you could really kind of see, wow, Austin needs more touches, and he would shoot. And one of my kind of, it's very arbitrary or whatever, but one of like my definitions for a good shooter is when they're open, are you surprised when they miss? And Austin became that kind of a shooter, right? And Rui, I don't think is quite there. He's not that kind of a shooter. You look at his release and stuff, it doesn't look like the kind of shot that would go in a ton from 3-point range on volume or whatever. So I think there's some fool's gold there. But Rui is somebody who I think 7 seconds or so left in the shot clock, the ball finds him, and you feel confident that at least a good look is going up,
Right.
And those kinds of players are really valuable, especially come playoff time when teams scheme everybody out of their first, second, and third options, and the ball finds people. And eventually, Rui, I think, is somebody who brings some real value there. So Reeves, I think, is what we saw in the playoffs from him was a little more who he's going to be moving forward. Rui, I think he'll probably take a slight step back in regards to shooting, but I think he will improve defensively. And I think both can be kind of cornerstones of a pretty solid rotation moving forward.
You mentioned the defense before. Just the offense looks great. I don't see any reason, one big on the floor most of the time, that, or even if it's Christian Wood on the floor, who's a really good offensive player, there's no reason why that should struggle. Defense, though, I do have some questions, of course, when you start mixing and matching some of these rotations. Any time for Christian Wood is probably not going to be fantastic. But it's not like a small group, but I worry a little bit about even the backcourt defenders. Yeah. There's something to that. Reeves got bullied a little bit over the Team USA run. D'Angelo Russell, Gabe Vincent, not the largest guys out there, and you get switches on players like that. It's going to be tough. How important are guys like Jared Vanderbilt, who may have fallen into the background a little bit, but probably has some utility for a team like this with defensive skills?
Well, you mentioned Max Christie also a second ago, and between Vanderbilt and Christie, I think Ham is really going to work to find those guys minutes, because they do need their defensive presences. Vanderbilt is somebody who at the beginning of just about every playoff series, he guarded Steph, and he guarded Ja, and he guarded Jamal in some spots as well. He is their best kind of rhythm breaking perimeter defender, and the Lakers really need him to step up offensively so that they can keep him on the floor and have a respectable defense.
Right.
Christie is also interesting because all of their like best defenders are 3, 4, and 5 type defenders, right? AD, who I think is the best defensive presence on planet Earth, is obviously a great guy to have anchoring your defense. LeBron, I think, has, when he's focused, is still going to be a pretty good defender. And then we mentioned Vanderbilt, but they don't really have like a point of attack defender that anybody is going to be particularly nervous about, right? Dennis Schroeder, we saw really get up and compete whenever he was out there on the court. Gabe Vincent isn't that. Austin Reeves isn't that. D'Angelo Russell for damn sure isn't that.
Right.
So I actually think this is a real opportunity for Max Christie, being the only guy who can really move his feet with, guards and shooting guards that they have. So defensively, I think there are some real questions, but those two guys, if they're able to stay on the court offensively, the defense should be okay.
It's definitely a jump, because Christie really wasn't in the rotation last year. No. He clearly has the potential, and Lakers fans were very excited when they got him, at least at the outset of the draft. I would definitely predict some minutes for him. He seems like a player that if he hits, then not the ceiling changes, but like the lineup versatility changes, certainly.
I also think, just really quickly, like the last year, the Lakers defense being even respectable was kind of a miracle when you consider everything that was going on. It's why, and again, I'm biased here, but I was kind of surprised that Anthony Davis just like never got any pub for Defensive Player of the Year, considering he was the only reason the Lakers were even mediocre at times.
Right.
Otherwise, they were a disaster collectively. If you look at that roster last year, And part of the reason too is that their offense wasn't very good. So you had a bad defense that had to get back in transition a bunch. And that's a really tough combination. I think this year with the Lakers offense being better, there's a better chance that, the other team is taking the ball out from the net, and the defense can get back and get set up a little bit. So I think one minor way that the Lakers can appear better defensively than they actually are is by scoring enough to force teams to stay out of transition, which is where everybody gets killed.
Sure. It's completely fair. And as long as you don't turn the ball over, then there should be reasons to be excited about that. One other thing I have, LeBron and AD, they were clearly battered by the end of the run last year, and then LeBron now going into the 21st season of his career. AD drafted in 2012, but he's got more mileage on him than you would think, just given the kind of role that he's played and all the injuries that he has piled up over the course of his years. Can those guys stay in peak condition to get to a playoff run? And is that how important is that when it comes to this team's ultimate goal?
Yeah, we're in uncharted territory with LeBron. We've been in uncharted territory with LeBron, right? Like you keep kind of waiting, and it's a dark thing to feel like you have to wait for, but you keep waiting for LeBron and like he has slowed down, right? It used to be every list that would come out, looking for the best players in the NBA, and LeBron was always at the top, and then slowly but surely, like Steph would start playing well enough, and Giannis started playing well enough that like it became a discussion as far as like, is LeBron the best player in the world? But he was still like top like 3 to 5 or whatever.
Right.
This year, I think he's probably closer to that 7 to like 13 range, I would probably say. And yet he's in year 21, which is just, it's unfathomable. So like, yeah, it is a concern, and you'd be really worried with any year 21 player keeping them healthy. But, by those standards, I think LeBron is the surest bet in professional sports history to stay healthy at this stage of his career. So I think, that is what it is. AD, I'm more nervous about, because like where LeBron really gets worn down is if he is the engine and rudder offensively every single game. And the Lakers really tried with Schroeder, they tried with Russ to bring in guys who can carry that load. But the thing with LeBron is he has that, internal hypercomputer that processes everything on the court. And he's like, yeah, no, I'm still the best equipped here to get us a good look, especially late in games. And I think that over the course of an 82-game series really wears him down. This year, though, you have Reeves, you have Russell, and Vincent. And the difference between those guys and their creativity is that they also make the game easier on LeBron when he has the ball. And I think, the amount of space that the Lakers are going to provide him and those kind of guys and that kind of creativity, that's going to keep him a little bit more fresh and allow him to just kind of take the random couple nights off. AD, though, that really concerns me. They don't have anybody that will help this defense not be a disaster if and when AD misses time. So, and every minute that AD is out, like he was all excited because he gets to play the quote unquote 4 this year with Christian Wood being on the court. And it's like, yeah, sure. But you're still doing all the center stuff, right?
Yeah.
You're still expected to go out and defend a pick and roll and rotate back and defend at the rim and rebound and do all those things. It hasn't actually changed his life defensively. So, if he was concerned about getting, kind of worn down over the course of a season because of everything he had to do defensively, I think that's still going to remain a concern this season. He does look thinner, though. And I thought last year was a big mistake bulking up to play center. This year, he looks a little bit lighter. And I think at this stage of his career, at this stage of his life, he's now crossed the 30-year-old threshold. That little less weight, I think, is really going to pay some dividends.
Hopefully so. It does seem like those two factors between LeBron's health and AD's health are there are always going to be factors for the Lakers, and then there's always going to be reasons to at least be a little bit cautious when predicting wins during the regular season. I have this team winning 48 games, which probably doesn't feel like that much of a jump, given that you basically flip the team and you go 17-7 in the post All-Star break section last year and have the best net rating in the NBA or whatever it was. But that is tied for third in the West for me, behind the Suns and the Nuggets. Where would you have them if you had to pick a win total?
Yeah, the West is so grueling, man. Like I have a really hard time picking anybody's over in the West, because on a nightly basis you're playing, like even on like a random Tuesday night, the Lakers within their own division are going to have to play the Kings, the Warriors, the Clippers, the Suns. Like,
Right.
they're going to play all of those teams 4 times. Where are those wins going to come from? And even like the bad teams in the West, Portland is going to be frisky now that they finally traded Dame, and I think there's going to be real buy-in there as they take it. They're going to beat the occasional team at the top of the West. Lakers have always struggled playing in Portland. San Antonio is going to be at the bottom of the conference again, but they have this freaking French alien that like you watched last night, him
insane.
going against Chet, and it was just like, this is not the sport that I grew up with.
Should not be possible at all. But and then I also talked to Jackson Gatlin from Houston, and there's a lot of positivity coming from Ime Udoka and just the way that they can kind of turn things around. So it's going to be hard in the West this year.
It absolutely will. And, I think teams in the East are really going to feast. You're going to see some real high win totals there, but I really think wins are going to be depressed throughout the conference. So that 48 mark sounds about right. I think their over-under coming into the season was like 48.5. And I would probably take the under, because it's going to be so effing grueling on a night-to-night basis in this conference.
But we do know with LeBron teams, and even with now Anthony Davis teams, that it's not defined by your success in the regular season. It's defined by your success in the playoffs. So I'm not sure if this team got better matching up with the Nuggets specifically, but I do think that they got better matching up with just about everybody else during this offseason. Where would you see this team going in the playoffs? And then do they have what it takes for a deep playoff run?
It's all going to come down to matchups, and which team hits enough from 3 to, it's really kind of a bummer that's what like the sport has kind of been boiled down to at this point. Who is knocking down their threes? Last year's Nuggets, the Lakers ran into an absolute buzzsaw with Jamal Murray making every contested 3 that he took, and Jokic firing off that like, step back, 1-footed Sambor shuffle 3-pointer that went in twice against them in close games. So I agree with you that they didn't really address defensively, and maybe even got a little bit worse defensively for what the Nuggets provide, the challenges that they provide. Jokic is so big and so physically imposing, and the Lakers don't have any real physicality to cope with that. So I think that'll have to be addressed over the course of the offseason. But I think the Lakers kind of looked at the conference and the amount of firepower at the very top, and they said, we have to score with these teams. We're going to have to score with Phoenix when Beal and Booker and KD have it going. We're going to have to score with the Golden State Warriors when Steph is just going absolutely ballistic. We're going to have to score with the Nuggets when Jokic is really feasting and also kicking it out to a wide open MPJ or a wide open Jamal Murray or a wide open KCP. So I think the Lakers, Harrison Wind from up there with DNVR made the point that like nobody did anything to defend Jokic any better. And it's like, I don't think he can. Like he's in that rarefied air where there isn't anything you can really do individually against him. The hope is that you're good enough and long enough and athletic enough to make it a little bit more difficult when the ball kicks out to shooters. And then I think even more importantly, you have to punish the Nuggets in stretches where they don't have their best lineups out there on the court. And you have to go out and really go on those runs to either get yourself back into the game or give yourself a little breathing room for whenever Jokic comes back in. So The Nuggets are a really tough matchup. The Clippers are a really tough matchup if they're ever healthy. The Suns are a really brutal matchup, and I think the Lakers belong in that kind of tier with those kinds of teams. I guess you could kind of sort of mention the Warriors too there, just out of respect to Steph. And I think, going into the season, they have a puncher's chance in just about every series, and hopefully over the course of the season they consolidate some of their depth and have a little bit more than a puncher's chance going up against some of these teams.
Well, we will see what happens. Anthony, thank you so much for hopping on with me. Really excited to hear about and to hear from you on the Lakers this year. Everybody, you can catch Anthony's words with Harrison Fagan as well with the Lakers Lounge. That's a great podcast covering the Lakers, and you guys do a fantastic job. So thank you so much for hopping on, and I'll talk to you soon, man.
Thank you very much for having me, man. Looking forward to continuing these conversations.
All right, joining me now is Brenden Duenas, who is covering the Phoenix Suns for AZ Sports Zone, Bright Side of the Sun, and is the host of Locked On Suns. Brenden, thank you so much for tuning in, man. I'm really excited to see your coverage for the Suns this year. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. I know we were talking before we hopped on just with, just knowing each other over the years, just through Twitter. So it's cool to jump on here and have a little conversation, a little preview of the Suns and everything, and looking forward to it.
Hoping that we get to talk deep into the season. I suspect that both of these teams, I'm not going to be doing as much Nuggets coverage on this particular show, but they're still the team that I'm here locally to cover. So we'll have plenty of conversations about these two teams, and I think that that'll be plenty of fun. I am excited, though, to see what the Suns do after some major moves in this offseason. A lot of tabloid news, a lot of things changed about the team over the course of these last couple seasons. Tell me, what is the most interesting thing about the team in your mind right now?
I think just the team that they built around Booker, Durant, and Beal, just surrounding them with high IQ shooters that can space the floor. We just saw a little preview of what that could look like today in preseason. They dropped 46 points. Obviously, it's preseason against the Pistons, so you can't take that stuff too seriously. But at the same time, for them to look that in sync right away, just in surrounding, like I said, just the shooters with Eric Gordon, Grayson Allen, Utah Watanabe, they have a very dangerous offense that I think has a chance to be one of the best in the NBA, if not the best, if they stay healthy. But at the same time, obviously the defense is a question mark. There's going to be some depth concerns that could pop up if one of their stars goes down. So, all that fun stuff. But overall, I just think the way they built the team is really interesting, and I'm looking forward to how it kind of comes together.
It's been over the course of these last couple of years that's kind of coalesced into a very impressive big three. The trade for Bradley Beal this summer, as you mentioned, the trade for Yusuf Nurkic, as you mentioned. This is going to be a very fascinating season for this group, and there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure on those guys in particular because you know what you're going to get from Devin Booker, Kevin Durant. Devin Booker, I have him ranked so high on a top 100 that I've been made fun of for ranking him that high. He is amazing, and what he did in the playoffs was amazing and deserves that credit. Bradley Beal and Yusuf Nurkic, though, the most recent stints that we've seen from those guys have been less than stellar. What can you tell us about what versions of Bradley Beal and Yusuf Nurkic the Suns are hoping to get?
Yeah, I'll start with Beal just because I think it's a little bit easier to transition from a team like the Wizards where he's the number one option. The offense flows through him, and he's asked to do a lot on a team that wasn't playing a ton of important games, especially defensively. They kind of had like a rec feel to their team, where it was just kind of rec ball, where it was just whatever. There wasn't a ton of structure. So I think in a Frank Vogel defense where he's going to have less of a burden offensively to where he could expend a little more energy on the defensive end. I think his role being simplified will, I think a lot of people are kind of underestimating how that's going to look. He's going to be getting a lot of open looks with the doubles that Booker and KD get all the attention. Just, Nuggets fans saw a little Landry Shamet have a game out of nowhere where he hit 6 threes. And I think you plug Beal in that role, and I think it's going to be a lot. He's going to have a lot more responsibilities than Shamet, hopefully. But at the same time, it's just it's going to be a seamless fit, and just the off-ball stuff I'm excited about. So with Beal, I think That's going to click a lot sooner than some people might think on the surface. But there will be some growing pains for sure. There's going to be, you have 3 stars that can drop 30 any game. Like they're going to have some growing pains for sure. So, and then on the other side with Nurkic, I very publicly is not a huge fan of the fit, to be honest. But I do think, he's a big body that he can rebound, mix it up a little bit. And, he's a pretty good passer too. So I think offensively, there's some creative things you could use him for. And, but on the defensive side, I think there's definitely going to be some struggles, especially come playoff time that, they're going to have to deal with and address. But I think with Eubanks and Metu and even Bolt, like they have some bodies they can throw out there. So it's, we'll see how the Nurkic experience goes. But I think playing in meaningful games hopefully will help him as well.
Yeah, it's a big factor, honestly, is I think people didn't realize how dark and depressing the Blazers have become the past couple of years and how that can affect a player like him. And it's a lot of pressure that they've put on him over the course of these last couple. Maybe less pressure this time around with Phoenix might be a good thing for him, but we will see. You mentioned the top 4, obviously. There are a bunch of new role players that this team has just added. They've had minimum contracts available to them during the offseason, and they tried to make the most of it, even making a trade to try to bolster some of that depth. Who are some of the role players that you're thinking about that you're assuming are going to step up in a playoff rotation that this team is going to learn to lean on?
Yeah, so I think the main 2 that stand out to me right off the bat are Eric Gordon and Grayson Allen, just being those versatile guards that can spread the floor. They can dribble a little bit. Like they're not, a primary creator or point guard or anything, but you could play them alongside any of Beal or Booker. And I think that interchangeability, like at the guard position, is going to help them a lot, both in regular season and playoffs. So to me, their guard rotation of Booker, Beal, Allen, and Gordon, like that's pretty damn strong. So I'm excited to see how that rotation works out. And then, I think where they're a little bit lacking is just that the wing department. That's I think Utah Watanabe is going to be an awesome floor spacer. We'll see how he looks defensively. I know he tries on that end, but he's definitely limited. Nasir Little was a nice sneaky pickup, could be a good energy guy. Josh Okogie last year had his moments where he looked like Gary Payton one day, and then the next day he'd disappear. So hopefully get a little more consistency out of him. So they definitely have some options with their depth, and the bigs I talked about a little bit too with Eubanks and Metu, guys that, they've been in NBA rotations. They can carve out minutes if they need to, but overall, like a lot of it's going to come down to the stars staying healthy and just finding the right guys around them.
I currently have Okogie as the guy penciled in at the small forward spot for them. Is that right? Do you think that's the way it's going to shake out? Or could it be Keita Bates-Diop? Could it be Watanabe? Are they going to go small? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think at this point, especially after today's game, they ended up starting him. And Vogel's been quoted a few times just saying like it could be matchup dependent. Like if they're playing a bigger team, we could see Bates-Diop or someone even like Metu or Bowl just to really just match size, just have a 5th starter that's just going to eat minutes early and then go smaller with some of those other guys later. But I think Okogie is probably the favorite just because they need point of attack defense pretty desperately. So his ability to fight over screens and kind of mess things up and take on the Stephs and Jamal Murray's and quick guards of the world that can shoot. I think that's where he's gonna probably have more of a role in games like that. So yeah, I think we could see a lot of different starting lineups unless Okogie just takes it and runs with it. So he's definitely the odds-on favorite though at this point.
I know a lot of people have mentioned no point guard, none of that. I'm not as worried about that, especially from an offensive standpoint. You put the ball in Bradley Beal's hands, Devin Booker's hands, Kevin Durant's hands, you're going to be fine. The most important thing, though, is like defensively to me. I still don't see a roster that's going to get enough stops. That's one question I have about this team kind of going into the season and into the playoffs. That's not going to affect them in the regular season because they're going to outgun teams. And I feel pretty strongly that they're going to be a massively awesome regular season opponent. But in the playoffs, when the matchups kind of boil down to it, do you think this team can get enough stops when it matters?
I think it's definitely a fair question. And it's definitely my biggest concern for this team because I think, like you said, offensively, like I don't think there's a team that can can really match them, like in terms of just the straight up firepower they have from different options. Obviously Milwaukee, we'll see how that works out. I think Denver, obviously, of course, is they're the defending champs. So until someone takes it from them, like that, to me, they're still the favorites to win it all. So I think those are the two teams I look at. And then Boston, obviously, I think adding Drew, there's some depth concerns with them, but yeah, defensively, I think they'll be good enough to where they can hold their own in moments, but there will definitely be some weaknesses that will be exposed. And I think that's why Frank Vogel, hiring him was massive, just because if anyone can make it work, I think it's him with his system where they play pretty conservative. They try to pack it in. It's more of a team defense. It's not about individuals shutting people down. And I think Booker's ability to defend is pretty underrated at this point too. I think he's not a stopper by any means, but I think he's turned into a pretty good defender. And same with Durant. Like when he turns it on, he can really defend, especially on the weak side, contesting shots, which could help Nurkic, especially with some of the ground coverage that he lacks, to put it nicely, I guess. But yeah, overall, I think it's definitely their biggest weakness, and it's really they just have to be competent on that end. They don't have to be special. I think if they can get in that 10 to 15 range defensively and just be the number one offense, and they have a chance to win games even in the playoffs. But if they're giving up 130 points, then there's a real problem there.
That's one thing I learned covering Denver this last year, is that it may not have looked pretty during the regular season, but they found ways to turn up the heat during the playoffs, and they did that against pretty much every team, and that was a very, very important piece of this. So it's going to be about finding those role players, and so guys like Okogie and Keita Bates-Diop will be extremely helpful. Even Eric Gordon, I know he's up there in years, but he's a pretty good point of attack defender and a switch defender when he wants to be. All right, well, hey, give me your season win total prediction. I'm curious to see where you think this team finishes in the regular season.
Yeah, so the over-under right now in most places is sitting somewhere in like the 51 to 53 range, something like that. And to me, like, I think they're good enough to flirt with 60, like just on talent, but we just don't know how much serious they're going to take the regular season in the first place. So I'm going to throw 55 out there as my actual guess. Just because I think there's going to be some days where, they, even with the new rules that they rest a guy or two that are like quote unquote injured, there's going to be actual injuries that happen because they, Durant, Beal, and Booker all have a little bit of an injury history too. So I think they have the talent to win 60. Do I think they're going to go out there and do it? Probably not. So I'll just go with 55.
I have them at 53, but I do have them winning at the top seed in the West, just because it feels like everything is so compressed with how much talent there is in the West. 11 teams that Absolutely. I think you could definitely call plus 500 teams if you wanted to, and nobody would really bat an eye. So that, I think, is compressing the number. But you're right. I think this is the team that I think has the best chance to be the top seed in the West. Just based off of having three different offensive options that you can call pillars, and just piecing it together behind them is going to be very helpful. I do have this team losing in the conference finals to Denver, though. I think that this is a group that is going to be like a very strong playoff team. They'll match up with pretty much everybody else, but I still just don't see the matchup against Jokic and Murray slowing those guys down enough defensively. That's what you're talking about. Can you hold teams to under 130? I'm not sure that they're going to be able to against Denver, but we'll see. Where do you see them finishing?
Yeah, I think I'm with you that I think that's going to be the conference finals at this point. Obviously, seeding could change that, because like we saw last year, that ended up being the second round matchup, and I think they're a better team than they were last year. But obviously, they gotta make it click, and hopefully, from my point of view, just outscore Denver, because I think that's how they're going to end up beating them if they can, and that's a tough task to do against the best player in the world, and in Jokic. There's no answer for him, so I think that's part of the reason they made that trade is Ayton's not going to, like, he's done a decent job in the past of trying to slow him down, but you're not going to slow him down. So at this point, I think they're just trying to lean into their strengths, and that's right now just trying to be the best offensive team possible and play competitive defensively. So I think I really could see that being, if both teams are healthy, going 7 games. Like, I think it's going to be a slugfest, but being the Suns guy, I'm going to go with the Suns here. I think It's going to be close though. I think these are the best two teams in the NBA right now. I think Boston and Milwaukee are right there as well. Obviously, I want to see how that Milwaukee team looks before saying anything, but yeah, I think those are the clear top four to me right there.
If you saw this team getting to the NBA Finals, do you think they'd beat whoever they come across?
If they're healthy, I think they can. But obviously, I think like I said, if they end up getting past Denver and it's a Milwaukee rematch, I don't know if my heart could handle that again. Because the Giannis Lillard combo is definitely deadly. Yeah. But I think it just really comes down to who's hot at the right time in health. That's just the cop out answer. But if those two things are clicking for them, I think they're definitely good enough to win a championship and get that first one. And I want to know the feeling that you guys just had. So that's kind of where I'm sitting.
Well, we will see what happens, Brenden. He is Brenden Duenas, who's covering for Bright Side of the Sun this year, Locked On Suns podcast at AZ Sports Zone on X. Dude, thank you so much for hopping on. I can't wait to read the rest of your coverage this year.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Have a good one.
All right, joining me now is Brenden Nunes, who is covering the Sacramento Kings for Sactown 1140, as well as the host of the Kings Pulse podcast. Brenden, thank you so much for joining me this season. Really excited to get to know the Kings this year.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ryan. I think this is a good idea and glad to be a part of it.
Thank you, man. It's going to be fun. We're going to have a lot of great times here. And I am very excited about the Kings because they are a team that kind of caught the league by surprise last year. This is very reminiscent of, because I cover the Nuggets, this is very reminiscent of the jump that the Nuggets made in the 2018-19 season, where kind of caught a lot of people by surprise, and then they just kind of stuck around. And it took a couple of years after that, but Denver ultimately won a title for the Kings, where you're coming off of this awesome year. What is the most interesting thing about the team heading into this upcoming season?
Yeah, I'll say real quick on your Nuggets comparison. I do use that a lot, and I know that everybody likes to do that considering that they are the team that just won the chip, but I do think there's a lot of parallels, like having a big that you run your offense through, a dynamic guard that's your other star, and a team that was really getting it done on the offensive end, and now they've just got to figure out ways to clean up the defense. I do think there's some parallels to sort of how the Nuggets started, but I think it's a lot easier to figure out the surrounding defenders when your two stars can shoot, because it's a lot easier to find defenders that maybe have some deficiencies offensively. And that's a lot harder next to De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. But I think to your question of what the most interesting thing is that, like, we know what this team is offensively. It's just, can they get better defensively? And they really brought back, I think it's the 8 guys that led the team in total minutes last year. They all brought back. They have some changes to the depth, like Sasha Vezenkov and Chris Duarte, JaVale McGee, that they really like as their backup 5. So there's some differences, but it's really hard to imagine, honestly, that they're going to be that much better defensively with so much of the same core, same rotational guys. They're betting on an increase in physicality being what really does it. And I think we saw them do okay defensively in their first round exit against the Golden State Warriors. Took them to 7 games. I think they did okay defensively, but I think the most interesting thing for how good this team is going to be is, can they find a way to be better defensively? Because the offense is there.
Yeah. Oh, and that's very clearly there. This was one of the best offenses. They were the best regular season offense. I think that you saw a bit of those struggles in the playoffs going against a team that kind of matched up a little bit better. But I think this team, as you sort of learn and you sort of figure out what they're going to do over the course of these next couple of years, they're just going to continue to get better on that end and get more experienced with the chemistry that they continue to develop, sort of like the Nuggets with Jokic and Murray. I love what De'Aaron Fox has provided. I've loved what Domantas Sabonis has provided. What's the word on Keegan Murray? I think he's the guy that a lot of people are very excited about to see what kind of development he can provide. Had such a fantastic rookie season last year. What's the word on him?
Yeah, he balled in Summer League, for what it's worth. California Classic, he played both games. He had a 40-piece. And the real thing is the way that he did it. Like, going and dunking on somebody to start the game is like, okay, this is a little different, or a couple off the dribble moves. Obviously he broke the rookie record for most made threes. We know he can shoot. It's just about doing a little bit more. He's kind of compared himself previously when he first got drafted to Chris Middleton. And it took me a while to see and believe in that ceiling, but after some of the flashes we've seen this offseason and even in his rookie year, I believe it a little bit. And they certainly are hyping up a big year for Keegan. In Summer League, Luke Lauk's assistant coach who coached their Summer League was talking about, there's some people around him that are being like, the last time I saw a leap like this from year 1 to year 2 is Kawhi Leonard. And I think they've tried to temper expectations a little bit. They're not saying he's Kawhi, but they're saying that specifically the jump from year 1 to 2, they're very much hyping it up. Just little stuff of, when he gets the board. Last year, he was very quick to look for De'Aaron or Domas, but just take it up yourself, initiate the offense or attack a closeout with a couple dribbles and make a move from there. And they're going to continue to try to test him defensively. Last year, they're putting him on the Devin Bookers, Paul George, Anthony Edwards. He did okay, which is about what you can expect for a rookie. Sure. I don't know that he projects to be a defensive stopper or anything, but they're certainly going to try. And they definitely are expecting a big jump from Keegan Murray, but I have also gotten a little bit of, maybe they are trying to temper expectations because they felt like there was a lot of hype around him and they don't want, it doesn't have to happen this year. It could be next year. Like, he's still young. He's only going into year 2, but there certainly is a lot of expectations for him to take another jump.
He is still so young and expecting, given how much he, I think, outperformed expectations in year 1 and even into the playoffs, it would be tough to expect him to even do so much better than that in year 2. But who knows? Maybe he's just rewriting the book on what we believed he could be coming out of college when the word was, hey, this is a solid starter. This is somebody that you believe can be in the league for a long time, but not necessarily that star. Maybe that's changing. And it would be really, really cool and really, really beneficial for the Kings if that did change. So I'm looking forward to watching that along with you. About the defense, obviously, if he is your defensive stopper, if he's the only guy within the starting lineup that can really get those consistent stops, that's probably an issue. Because I'm looking at the lineup right now: De'Aaron Fox, Kevin Huerter, Harrison Barnes, Keegan Murray, Domantas Sabonis. That's challenging from a defensive standpoint. And even if Davion Mitchell and even Trey Lyles, who I really appreciated his contributions last year, even if those guys are going to be in the rotation, you have to get overall better contributions from everybody across the board in order to make a defensive leap. Do you think that's in this team, or is that still a year away?
I still think it's going to take time. They definitely think that they can take a jump this year, and so maybe I'm wrong, but I think Chris Duarte does stand out a little bit here. He's a guy that they like on both ends of the floor. And, while you look at that lineup, and I agree with you, there's no stopper. Like, if Murray's your best stopper, that's not a great thing, because I don't even know that I'd really call him that. They're just trying to grow him into that.
He might ultimately become that. Like, right. We're still waiting on that, of course, but it takes so long to figure stuff like that out over the course of many years in the league. And he's just still so young with that.
Yeah, I agree. I do also think on the other end, if you look through that lineup, like, the only real liability is probably the 2 guard, right? If you go Huerter or Monk in that closing lineup. That's where Duarte is kind of interesting to me. Like, I think there could be nights where maybe if you don't want somebody on the floor at the end of games, that other teams can be like, give me that guy switched on to me. And that's typically Kevin Huerter or Malik Monk, that maybe you can have Duarte out there as your 2 in closing lineups. And they're pretty optimistic about JaVale McGee as well. I guess this is a theme, but I'm skeptical of JaVale because, to be honest, he was really, really bad last year on a team that needed centers. They needed bigs. They wanted him to start at the beginning of the year. It wasn't going to work. But I always come back to Richaun Holmes, could not get on the floor in Sacramento, and I think that was justified because he didn't fit their play style. But I do think Richaun Holmes is a good player, and ironically, they swapped spots. I think there's some optimism that I can believe in that JaVale would just fit this system better, an extremely high-paced offense. He'll get touches, and so maybe there's something there, but that's only, 13, 15 minutes we're talking about when Domas is sitting. They're not going to play together. I don't think so. And so those are where maybe some of the potential improvements could come. But again, they're really betting on physicality. They keep saying the word physicality. They want to be more physical on both ends of the ball, but specifically defensively. And they say it starts with Fox, defending point of attack and sort of setting the tone. So if he can take a jump in that aspect, maybe there's defensive improvement, and they're certainly hoping. But honestly, I don't feel very good about betting on it when it's the same core, really.
Fair. And it's completely fair. And I have to imagine that a personnel change will come at some point that helps the defense get a little bit better. But the offense is still going to carry the day in a lot of ways. There's no reason to believe that they're going to regress a ton, given that Keegan Murray should develop. And the bench is still fantastic. Having Malik Monk as your sixth man and Davion Mitchell and Trey Lyles coming off the bench, that's going to be very helpful. I do want to ask about Fox and Sabonis. That is a duo, and Fox, I think, really acquitted himself in the playoffs well. Domantas Sabonis struggled, had his struggles going up against the Kevon Looney, Draymond Green pairing. What kind of lessons were learned there that you think that they can take into this next season to ensure that something like that doesn't happen again?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the physicality is a big part of this, and I know that I've said that word over and over, but I'm kind of just echoing what they're doing. I'm telling you, physicality is said over and over again since Summer League into training camp, and I don't think we're going to stop hearing it. But I think that they learn the physicality that comes with the postseason, and they hope to relay that into the regular season. I think more specifically for Sabonis, though, it's that willingness to take that mid-range shot, because Golden State really tried to take away his playmaking, and they were okay with him scoring, and he's just not a guy that likes to play that way. Not that he can't. I think we've seen him do it before. Like that mid-range shot, I feel like we've seen him be a good mid-range shooter, but he just wasn't taking it much last year. It wasn't like part of the flow of their offense, and I think that he talked about at his exit interviews really wanting to improve that mid-range shot. I think we're going to see that a little bit more, and it's not nothing that he was playing with a broken thumb for most of last season, including the playoffs. And it wasn't his shooting hand, but I think that plays a factor for sure. And so I think specifically from that perspective, we'll see more just elbow jumpers, just sort of while they're running the DHO. If you're really off of him, that he's just going to pull that. I think that that's what needs to happen a little bit more. And also, you were playing a really, really good team, and they still were right there. They could have won that game 7. Everybody always talks about Curry's 50 piece, obviously, but it really was, I think, like 17 offensive rebounds they allowed. Yeah. Like Coach Brown will say that it didn't matter what Curry did. They still could have won the game if they would have defensive rebounded and not missed 10 plus free throws. So I still think they were absolutely in it. I think when it comes to lessons learned for Sabonis, though, it's just like being ready mentally to pull that mid-range more if you need to.
Couple more questions here. Season win total prediction for this team. Team won 48 games last year. I have them at 46 wins this year, just a slight kind of regression back to the mean, but not enough where I think it's actually going to really affect them. They'll still be a playoff team. They'll still be a consistent force. The West, I think, has just gotten a little bit better around them with a lot of these teams kind of loading up and maybe figuring some things out. Where do you see this team finishing, and with how many wins?
Yeah, they were ridiculously healthy last year, and the organization will counter with what I just mentioned. Domas had a broken thumb the whole year. De'Aaron dealt with that in the postseason. Keegan had a similar issue that he kind of just kept to himself. Trey Lyles had things he played through, so it's not like there was nothing. But obviously, if you still are able to play through it, the injuries aren't that bad necessarily outside of Domas's broken finger. But yeah, I think they're going to be right around the same range. It's just about really can they be better in the postseason. So I still think, I think your 46 is about right. I think anywhere from 45 to 50 is kind of what we're talking about. I could see them getting better. I could see a lot of these guys are about 24 to 26. And there's absolutely paths for internal improvement outside of Keegan Murray that we already mentioned. Like Fox is 25. I think Herter and Monk are both somewhere between 24, 26. So these guys are fairly young. It's not insane to think that they could take another jump in their games. And so if that doesn't happen, And they'll probably deal with more injuries than they did last year, but they loaded up on the depth a little bit more that I think will help them be able to survive when those moments come. I think that 45 to 50 range is about right. I honestly, if I have to guess an exact number, I might just go back to the same 48.
Fair. Completely fair. And I hope that they do it, man, because it's more fun when the Kings are good, because you guys know this better than anybody, that surviving this last decade and a half, basically
17 years,
it's got to be frustrating. And so just having a team that you can really get behind, do you think that they can recreate the same energy that was there last year and just continue to push forward, lighten the beam?
I definitely think so. Like, you already see it at training camp. Like, spirits are high. These guys really get along with each other. Like, one of my personal favorite stories from last year was like Trey Lyles at his exit interview talking about how he never let himself get close to his teammates because he'd been on something like 4 teams in 6 seasons or something like that, which I'm sure you're aware.
Sure.
But he actually allowed himself to get close with his teammates, and the word family gets thrown around a lot during this training camp. Like I mentioned, so many of the same guys are back, and such a big aspect of last year was the team chemistry. And I think that starts with Coach Brown, and even higher than that, Monty McNair, Wes Wilcox, Vivek Ranadive, the owner as well. But really, De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, like, really don't seem to have much ego that is, portrayed. And I think that goes down the line. Like, these guys all clearly really, really enjoy playing with each other. And it's so night and day compared to the times when Buddy Hield and Marvin Bagley were around. And nothing against those guys, but like, you knew that they were on their way out. It was just a matter of time, and there was a weird feeling around it. And this year they're going into camp. There's no stories that need to get sorted before we can just get down to basketball. There's no James Harden, Ben Simmons thing going on. There's no figuring out somebody's injury and are they healthy. Like, they are just rolling into this. They have a pre-existing chemistry and get to build off what they started to establish last year. So I do think they're going to continue to keep rolling. And I think their off the court and on the court chemistry is really easy to overlook. And because it's hard to see, right? But these guys genuinely really enjoy playing with each other. And I think that was a huge part of last year. And I don't think there's any reason to think that won't change this year.
Well, we will see what happens with the Kings this year. Brenden, thank you so much for hanging out with me. You can catch Brendan's work at Sactown 1140 as well as the Kings Pulse podcast. Thank you so much, Brenden. Good luck this year.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.
All right, that'll do it for the Pacific Division season preview on this episode of the Alley-Oop podcast. Thank you so much to CJ Holmes, to Robert Flom, Anthony Irwin, Brandon Duenas, and Brendan Nunes for their time. Really excited for where this is going to go, and I've just been floored by all of the love and support on the show so far. Keep liking, keep subscribing, as I mentioned before, and let's see if we can take this bad boy to the top. Really, really happy with how things have come out so far. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I'll talk to you guys on tomorrow's episode with the Southeast Division.